You open 10 tabs, then 20. A new idea excites you, then another, and suddenly the day is gone and nothing feels finished. Your desk is full of beginnings, your mind is full of sparks, but your chest feels strangely heavy. I felt that quiet pressure too, that uneasy sense of being pulled in every direction, and fully present in none. Some people call it curiosity, others call it lack of focus. Either way, it leaves a lingering question you can't shake. Why does loving so many things sometimes feel like losing your way? Carl Rogers once wrote, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." On Becoming a Person, 1961. But what if you're not even sure who that self is anymore? Is this endless curiosity a gift, or a sign that something deeper is unsettled inside you? That uneasy feeling, it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from movement, constant movement. Your attention is alive, intensely alive. It jumps quickly, connects ideas rapidly, lights up when something is new or unfamiliar. You might notice it in small moments. You watch one short video, then suddenly you're researching astronomy at midnight. You start learning guitar, then discover digital art, then psychology, then business strategy, and each one feels deeply meaningful while it lasts. From the inside it feels like energy, expansion, possibility, long. From the outside it can look like chaos. Psychology has long understood that attention is not neutral. It is selective, active, and deeply tied to what feels emotionally stimulating. William James, one of the founders of modern psychology, wrote, "My experience is what I agree to attend to." The Principles of Psychology, 1890. In other words, your life is shaped by what captures your attention, and if many things capture it at once, your experience becomes wide, but also scattered. You may recognize the pattern. The beginning is electric. A new interest feels like stepping into a brightly lit room. Everything is fresh, vivid, full of promise. But slowly, familiarity creeps in. The light softens. Effort is required. And somewhere inside, a quiet restlessness starts whispering, maybe something else will feel more alive. So you shift again. Roll on. Individually, each shift makes sense. But over time, something subtle accumulates. Unfinished projects, half-developed skills, books with bookmarks permanently resting in the first third. Not failure, just dispersion. And dispersion has a psychological cost. Attention that never settles cannot deepen. Curiosity that constantly expands cannot consolidate. The mind becomes rich in stimulation but poor in grounding. This is where the tension begins to tighten, because what feels like freedom, the ability to move endlessly between interests, can slowly start to feel like instability, like trying to stand firmly on water. And when attention keeps moving, something deeper begins to move with it, your sense of who you are. At first, having many interests feels like having many versions of yourself. The creative one, the analytical one, the reflective one, the ambitious one. Each new passion reveals a different side of you, and that can feel exciting, even liberating. But identity needs continuity. It needs threads that hold experiences together over time. When those threads don't fully form, something subtle happens. You stop feeling like a person who explores many things, and start feeling like someone who is always becoming, but never fully being. It shows up in ordinary conversations. Someone asks what you do, and your answer feels strangely incomplete. You hesitate. You explain multiple directions at once. You add qualifiers. I'm kind of into, I've been trying, I started learning. Nothing feels solid enough to stand on. This isn't just social discomfort. It touches something deeper. Psychological coherence. Erik Erikson, the developmental psychologist known for his work on identity formation, wrote, "In the social jungle of human existence, there is no feeling of being alive without a sense of identity." Identity, Youth and Crisis, 1968. A sense of identity is not just a label. It is emotional stability. It tells you where to invest energy, what to persist through, what to let go of. Without it, every decision feels heavier, because every choice feels like defining who you are and excluding who you could have been. So when you have many interests, choosing one path doesn't feel simple. It feels like closing doors, like shrinking possibility. like losing parts of yourself that haven't fully lived yet. And that's when curiosity begins to carry a hidden emotional weight. Not just excitement, but quiet anxiety. The fear that committing means abandoning. The fear that defining yourself means limiting yourself. So you keep moving, keep exploring, keep expanding. But beneath that movement, another question begins to form, one that is harder to notice, but impossible to ignore once it appears. Are you moving toward what you love, or away from the discomfort of staying? If you look closely at the moment you shift from one interest to another, something subtle is usually happening first. It's rarely random. Often there is a small friction point, confusion, difficulty, boredom, or the quiet realization that progress is slower than you expected. You sit down to practice something you once felt excited about. But today it feels different, heavier, less magical. Your mind resists. Suddenly another idea appears, something new, fresh, full of promise. The contrast is immediate. One path feels demanding, the other feels alive. And without much thought, you turn toward what feels lighter. This is not laziness. It is emotional regulation. Psychologically, human beings are wired to move away from discomfort and toward relief. Even subtle discomfort, uncertainty, self-doubt, mental strain, activates avoidance tendencies. Novelty becomes soothing because it removes you from the emotional tension of struggling with something unfinished. Sigmund Freud described this basic mechanism simply. The ego avoids unpleasure, beyond the pleasure principle, 1920. While modern psychology has evolved far beyond Freud's full framework, this idea still holds. We naturally shift away from experiences that generate psychological strain. Over time, the mind learns a quiet association. Difficulty means tension, novelty means relief. So every time effort becomes uncomfortable, a new interest feels not just appealing, but emotionally necessary. Exploration begins to function like a reset button, a way to return to enthusiasm without passing through frustration. But here is the hidden cost. Each time you leave at the first sign of discomfort, you never experience what happens after persistence. You never discover the satisfaction that lives beyond confusion, or the confidence that grows through mastery. You only experience beginnings, never transformation. And gradually something deeper forms beneath the surface, not just a pattern of shifting interests, but a relationship with discomfort itself. A relationship built on leaving before staying becomes meaningful, which raises a more unsettling question. If difficulty is what drives you away, what makes beginnings feel so irresistibly powerful in the first place? There is a biological reason. Beginnings feel intoxicating. When you start something new, your brain releases dopamine, not because you have achieved anything yet, but because something might happen. Anticipation itself is rewarding. Possibility is chemically stimulating. This is why buying a new notebook feels inspiring before you write a single page. Why planning a project feels energizing before any real work begins. Why imagining the future can feel more satisfying than building it. Neuroscientist and psychiatrist Judson Brewer explains this pattern clearly when describing habit and reward learning. He writes, "The brain links behavior with reward, and the stronger the reward, the more likely we are to repeat the behavior." The Craving Mind, 2017. And novelty is a powerful reward. When something is new, your brain predicts potential success, discovery, stimulation. That prediction alone releases dopamine. But as familiarity grows, prediction drops. The brain becomes efficient. The emotional reward decreases. What once felt exciting now feels ordinary, even if you are progressing. This creates a psychological loop. New interest, dopamine surge, re-engagement, effort, familiarity, reduced reward, restlessness, new interest. Notice what's missing from this loop: completion. Completion requires staying long after the emotional reward has faded. It requires tolerating the quiet middle, the repetitive practice, the slow improvement, the invisible progress. But biologically, the middle is less stimulating than the beginning. So your nervous system nudges you gently towards something that feels alive again. And if you follow that pull repeatedly, your brain becomes trained to expect emotional reward only from starting, not from continuing. That's when possibility itself becomes addictive, not success, not mastery. Just the feeling of starting. And slowly, without realizing it, you may begin to prefer potential over reality, beginnings over depth, movement over meaning, which leads to a deeper tension, one that extends beyond your brain and into the world around you. Because while your mind is wired to love variety, the world often demands something very different. At some point, your inner restlessness meets something external, expectation. School asks what you want to become, not what you want to explore. Job applications ask for a clear path, not a wide one. Success stories celebrate mastery, discipline, focus, singular purpose. And slowly, without anyone saying it directly, you absorb a quiet message. To be taken seriously, you must become one thing. So when your mind keeps branching outward, you don't just feel scattered, you feel misaligned. As if the way you naturally think doesn't fit the structure of how life is supposed to work. You see people who choose early and stay consistent, the musician who practices for 10 years, the entrepreneur who builds one company with relentless focus, the academic who dedicates decades to one field. Their lives look linear, directed, legible. Yours feels multi-directional. And comparison begins to erode something inside you. Not your curiosity, but your trust in it. Psychologist Barry Schwartz in The Paradox of Choice 2004 wrote, "Learning to choose is hard. Learning to choose well is harder. And learning to choose well in a world of unlimited possibilities is harder still." Modern life does not just offer options, it floods you with them. And when you are naturally sensitive to possibility, that abundance becomes emotionally overwhelming. The problem is not simply that you have many interests. The problem is that the world rewards visible commitment and treats open-ended exploration as immaturity, indecision, or lack of discipline. So you begin to internalize the pressure. You ask yourself questions that carry quiet shame. Why can't I just stick to one thing? Why do others seem so certain? What is wrong with me? But beneath that self-doubt lies a deeper misunderstanding. The issue is not that you are exploring widely. It is that your experiences remain psychologically separate from each other. They have not yet formed a pattern. And that realization leads to a turning point, one that shifts the problem entirely. Maybe the real issue is not how many things you love, but whether those many things can ever become one coherent self. Imagine your interests as scattered puzzle pieces, each one meaningful, each one genuine. But if they never connect, they remain fragments, and living among fragments feels disorienting. This is the difference between multiplicity and fragmentation. Psychologically, well-being is not built on having a simple identity. It is built on having an integrated one. A sense that your experiences, values, and directions, however diverse, belong to the same inner narrative. Carl Jung described this lifelong process as individuation, the gradual integration of different aspects of the self into a coherent whole. He wrote, "Individuation does not shut one out from the world, but gathers the world to oneself. The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, 1960. Integration does not require reducing your interests. It requires understanding the thread that runs through them. Maybe your many pursuits all express curiosity about how things work. Maybe they reflect a deep need for creativity. Maybe they reveal a longing to understand people, systems, or meaning itself. When you begin to see the pattern, something shifts internally. The separate pieces stop competing. They start informing each other. Skills transfer, insights overlap, identity stabilizes, not because it is narrow, but because it is organized. You are no longer someone who jumps randomly between passions. You are someone exploring one deep question from many angles. But integration alone does not resolve everything. Because even when you understand the pattern, a decision still remains. At some point, depth requires staying, and staying always feels like choosing. Which leads to the most emotionally difficult step of all, learning how to commit without feeling like you are losing yourself. Even after you begin to see the pattern connecting your interests, something still resists. Understanding yourself is one thing. Staying with something long enough to grow roots is another. Because commitment feels heavy. Not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it shows up quietly. In the moment you realize progress will take months, not days. in the realization that excitement has faded, but responsibility remains. In the awareness that continuing means not starting something else. And that's where the old fear returns. If you stay here, what happens to everything else you could have been? This is where emotional maturity enters the picture. Not as discipline alone, but as tolerance, the ability to remain present, even when possibility narrows, to hold the discomfort of not choosing everything, while trusting that choosing something does not erase who you are. Psychologist Angela Duckworth, known for her research on long-term perseverance, defines sustained commitment as passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit, 2016. But what often goes unnoticed is that perseverance is not fueled by constant excitement. It is fueled by meaning that survives the loss of excitement. The mature mind understands something the restless mind struggles to accept. Commitment is not a permanent prison. It is a temporary deepening. You do not choose one thing forever. You choose one thing fully, for now. Real long dark psychology, and something unexpected happens when you do. Depth creates nourishment that novelty never could. Skill begins to compound. Confidence becomes embodied rather than imagined. What once felt like limitation starts to feel like expansion from within. You discover that staying is not the opposite of freedom, it is another form of it. Because freedom is not only the ability to move, it is also the ability to remain. And when you finally experience what it means to stay long enough for transformation to occur, the central tension that haunted you from the beginning begins to soften. You were never choosing between curiosity and commitment. You were learning how to let them work together. In the beginning, the question felt painful and unresolved. If you love too many things, are you scattered, unfocused, unable to become anyone at all? But the journey reveals something quieter, deeper, more compassionate. Your many interests were never the problem. They were signals, evidence of a mind that is alert, responsive, alive to possibility. The real struggle was not the number of directions pulling at you, but the fear that choosing depth meant losing parts of yourself forever. It never did. Psychological growth is not about shrinking your curiosity into something manageable. It is about learning to hold its vastness without being controlled by its constant motion, to see the patterns that unite your passions, to stay long enough for meaning to take root, to commit not because you must abandon other paths, but because depth reveals what surface exploration never can. The tension that once felt like conflict becomes integration. You can love many things, and still live one moment fully. You can remain open to possibility, while giving yourself permission to go deep. And perhaps that is what your restless curiosity was always asking for. Not endless movement, but a place where all its energy could finally gather and become something real.